War movies are supposed to inspire pride and honor, right? Well, some didn't. Some made generals furious, politicians demand bans, and audiences walk out in disgust. These weren't just films, they were cinematic firestorms that lit up censors and critics alike. What happens when Hollywood dares to tell the truth, or exaggerates it so much, that it rattles entire nations? Stick around, because the stories behind these movies are as explosive as the battles they show. All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. It started as a novel, but the film turned into a cultural earthquake. All Quiet on the Western Front was one of the first American war films to rip away any idea of glory and show war as pure slaughter. Director Lewis Milestone put audiences directly in the mud-filled trenches of World War I. Young German soldiers who thought they were marching into greatness instead found themselves trapped in a nightmare of death, rats, and despair. In America, critics praised its brutal honesty, but some states cut scenes they called too cruel. Overseas, things got violent. At its Berlin premiere, Nazi supporters stormed theaters, released rats, and hurled stink bombs, accusing the film of insulting German honor. Within days, the film was banned outright in Germany. France sliced out scenes showing French brutality, and Austria needed riot police just to keep screenings from collapsing. Universal Pictures poured $1.25 million into making it, a huge gamble in 1930. But what they bought was trouble. Nazi propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels declared war on the movie, calling it a Jewish attack on German pride. Soon after, the Nazis even burned copies of author Erich Maria Remarque's book. The irony? The film still went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. Its graphic, hopeless portrayal of trench warfare made it an artistic triumph, but also a political lightning rod. Controversial, yes, but also timeless proof that telling the truth about war always rattles the powerful. The Men, 1950. Marlon Brando's very first film role wasn't the dashing rebel most people expect. Instead, he played a paralyzed war veteran trapped in a wheelchair, bitter and broken. Directed by Fred Zinnemann, The Men dared to show what happened after the parades ended and the cameras stopped rolling. Soldiers didn't always return as heroes. They returned with shattered bodies, ruined marriages, and psychological scars no one wanted to see. Hollywood had always painted war vets as stoic and triumphant. This movie showed them as human, complicated, and sometimes deeply angry. The Pentagon wasn't thrilled. Military officials pressured the studio to tack on a patriotic ending, but producer Stanley Kramer refused. Several theater chains flat out refused to show it, calling it anti-military and depressing. Brando didn't take the role lightly. He actually lived in a veterans hospital for weeks, learning from real paralyzed soldiers how to maneuver a wheelchair and live with injuries. Many of those same men appeared as extras in the film, lending it a gritty authenticity that audiences weren't used to. Critics applauded the realism, but box office numbers told another story. On a $1.1 million budget, it only made $800,000. Some veterans praised it for honesty. Others blasted it for shaming soldiers. Either way, it changed Hollywood forever. The Men opened the door for stories that didn't end with ticker tape parades, reminding everyone that the cost of war doesn't stop at the battlefield. The Green Berets, 1968. Picture this: John Wayne, America's cowboy, directing and starring in a war movie during the height of Vietnam. What could go wrong? Well, everything. The Green Berets was a glossy, unapologetically pro-military take on the war, showing American soldiers as noble saviors and the Viet Cong as faceless villains. Critics smelled propaganda immediately. Roger Ebert gave it 0 stars, calling it offensive to human intelligence. Newspapers blasted it for portraying Vietnam like a Saturday matinee western, while real body counts kept climbing overseas. Protesters picketed theaters, chanting against Wayne's vision of war as a noble adventure. For many, the film felt like a government recruiting ad, not a drama. The Pentagon, however, loved it. They gave Wayne full cooperation, helicopters, extras, even real military bases, because they knew the movie aligned perfectly with their message. That only made the backlash louder. Younger audiences, already distrustful of authority, saw it as proof that Hollywood was shilling for Washington. Despite the critical roasting, audiences showed up. The film pulled in serious box office numbers, especially in conservative states. Wayne, a lifelong patriot, defended it fiercely, saying America needed heroes on screen. But in the end, the Green Berets became a symbol of how divided the country was. To some, it was a proud salute. To others, it was cinematic brainwashing. Either way, controversy followed it like a shadow. Soldier Blue 1970. If you thought westerns were just cowboys and sunsets, Soldier Blue wanted to prove you wrong. This film shocked audiences with a brutal depiction of the U.S. cavalry massacring Native Americans, based on the real Sand Creek Massacre. Director Ralph Nelson didn't pull punches. The final sequence showed scalping, beheadings, and children being cut down in gunfire, imagery almost no American film had dared to show before. Nelson admitted he wasn't really making a western. He was making a Vietnam allegory. He wanted Americans to look at their own history of slaughter and connect it to what was happening overseas. That's why the violence was so extreme. He wanted people to feel sick, to walk out shaken. At one preview, the audience's reaction was so hostile that people shouted for the theater to be burned down. Censors worldwide freaked. Britain demanded heavy cuts, particularly to scenes involving women and children. The American version was hacked down by nearly 14 minutes. Critics either called it an important anti-war statement or a disgusting exploitation film. Quentin Tarantino later said it was the first Western that made him physically ill, and he meant that as a compliment. Despite costing just $3.5 million, it earned over $8 million, proving that outrage can sell tickets. In the end, Soldier Blue ripped away the myth of noble cavalrymen and forced audiences to confront the idea that America's wars, past or present, weren't always fought with honor. Catch-22, 1970. How do you make a movie about the absurdity of war? By making it absurd. Catch-22, based on Joseph Heller's best-selling novel, turned World War II into a surreal comedy of madness and bureaucracy. Pilots trapped in endless bombing runs. Officers more worried about paperwork than lives. It was satire turned into cinema. But satire doesn't always sell. The Pentagon refused to cooperate, calling it disrespectful. Veterans groups attacked it, saying it mocked the very people who had fought to save the world. Audiences expecting another The Dirty Dozen instead got scenes of soldiers trapped in nonsensical missions with no hope of escape. Many walked out confused. Director Mike Nichols filled the film with an A-list cast, Alan Arkin, Orson Welles, Martin Sheen, but the chaos on screen mirrored the chaos behind the scenes. The production ballooned in cost and dragged on for months. By the time it premiered, the Vietnam War had made audiences too raw for satire. Critics split down the middle. Some hailed it as genius, a perfect adaptation of Heller's biting novel. Others said it was messy, bloated, and incoherent. Commercially, it stumbled, but over the years, it's gained cult respect as one of the boldest war satires ever filmed. The message was simple. War itself is insanity, and trying to make sense of it only proves how absurd it all is. MASH 1970. Before it was a beloved TV show, MASH was Robert Altman's chaotic, bloody, and irreverent war comedy that left censors fuming. Set in a field hospital during the Korean War, it followed a group of surgeons who drank, joked, and rebelled while saving lives in the middle of carnage. The humor was dark, the blood was real, and the message, war is insane, so you might as well laugh before it swallows you whole. The military hated it. Officials said it mocked discipline, disrespected soldiers, and planted doubt in audiences' minds during the Vietnam War. Censors tried cutting both the gore and the bawdy humor. Critics were divided too. Some called it tasteless. Others hailed it as groundbreaking satire. Altman admitted openly it wasn't really about Korea, it was about Vietnam. And he was daring audiences to get the joke. What saved MASH was timing. Released at the peak of anti-war sentiment, younger audiences embraced its cynicism. It won. The Palme d'Or at Cannes proved a box office hit and launched Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould into stardom. Still, its legacy remains controversial. Was it a comedy about medics or a savage takedown of America's obsession with war? Altman knew the answer, but he left audiences to wrestle with it themselves. Johnny Got His Gun, 1971. Dalton Trumbo had already been blacklisted during the McCarthy era, but when he finally directed his own script, he delivered one of the most disturbing anti-war films ever made. Johnny Got His Gun tells the story of Joe Bonham, a World War I soldier blown apart by a shell. He survives, but with no arms, no legs, no face, and no way to communicate. His mind is intact, trapped inside a body reduced to medical machinery. If that sounds horrifying, it's because it was meant to be. The film was brutally anti-war, portraying soldiers not as heroes, but as victims of a machine that chewed them up and spat them out. Critics praised it for bravery, but theaters wouldn't touch it. Distributors struggled to book screenings, audiences left shaken. And in the Vietnam era, its message hit nerves too raw to handle. Financially, it bombed. Trumbo even mortgaged his house to finish production. The movie seemed destined for obscurity until decades later, when Metallica used clips in their music video for One. Suddenly, a new generation discovered it. Today, it's remembered as one of the bleakest, most haunting war films ever made. Not for the battles, but for what happens when a human being becomes a prisoner inside his own flesh. Hearts and Minds, 1974. Sometimes a documentary can do more damage than a blockbuster. Hearts and Minds was exactly that. A Vietnam War documentary so raw, it outraged half the country. Director Peter Davis spliced together combat footage, interviews with soldiers, and shocking images of civilian massacres. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He even included a U.S. officer saying chillingly, "It's always a pleasure to kill a gook." The Pentagon hated it. Pro-war groups called for it to be banned. Some theaters outright refused to screen it. And then came the Oscars. When Hearts and Minds won Best Documentary, producer Bert Schneider read a message of solidarity from the Viet Cong delegation on live television. The audience erupted in boos and cheers, while presenters scrambled to distance the Academy from his words. For supporters, it was proof that America needed to confront the truth about Vietnam. For critics, it was pure propaganda. Either way, it became one of the most divisive documentaries in U.S. history. Even today, Hearts and Minds sparks debate about how far filmmakers should go in showing the brutality of war. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Francis Ford. Coppola's Apocalypse Now wasn't just a movie. It was a descent into madness for the characters, for the audience, and even for the cast and crew making it. Filmed in the jungles of the Philippines, production was so chaotic it became legendary. Martin Sheen had a heart attack. Sets were destroyed by typhoons. Marlon Brando showed up overweight and unprepared, forcing Coppola to improvise entire sections of the script. The movie itself was no less shocking. Inspired by Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, it portrayed U.S. soldiers in Vietnam as drugged, violent, and often completely insane. Helicopter raids set to Wagner, a colonel obsessed with surfing in the middle of firefights. And at its core, the infamous Colonel Kurtz, Brando's monstrous figure who embodied the moral collapse of war. The Pentagon wanted nothing to do with it. Critics were split. Was it a masterpiece or a chaotic fever dream? Audiences were stunned, some offended, others exhilarated. Coppola famously told the press, "My film is not about Vietnam. It is Vietnam." That line alone cemented Apocalypse Now as one of the most controversial films ever made. It wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about the madness of the entire enterprise. Coming Home, 1978. Hollywood wasn't ready for a war romance like this. Directed by Hal Ashby, Coming Home told the story of a paralyzed Vietnam veteran who returns home to a country that doesn't know what to do with him. Jane Fonda, already branded Hanoi Jane for her anti-war activism, played opposite John Voight in a drama that blended politics, love, and the raw pain of soldiers left behind. Before the film even premiered, conservative groups were outraged. Veterans accused Fonda of exploiting their suffering for her political agenda. Theater protests erupted, with some demanding boycotts. Critics argued over whether the movie was brave or manipulative. What made it explosive was honesty. Instead of glory, it showed veterans struggling with trauma, broken relationships, and lost identity. The Pentagon refused to support it, but audiences still came. The movie went on to win 3 Academy Awards, including Best Actor for Jon Voight and Best Actress for Fonda. The controversy never really faded. Supporters hailed it as a necessary reckoning with the cost of Vietnam. Detractors saw it as Hollywood stabbing soldiers in the back. Either way, Coming Home forced America to confront the fact that not every soldier's return was met with parades. Sometimes it was met with silence and pain. Full Metal Jacket, 1987. Stanley Kubrick didn't do soft. When he set out to make a Vietnam film, he gave audiences Full Metal Jacket, a movie so unrelenting that it left even hardened critics shaken. The first half was pure psychological warfare. Marine recruits broken down by R. Lee Ermey's drill sergeant, a role so vicious it became iconic. The second half dropped those soldiers into a Vietnam nightmare, where death came fast and meaningless. The controversy? Plenty. Military officials bristled at how boot camp was shown as sadistic brainwashing. Veterans argued over its accuracy. Some said Kubrick nailed the madness. Others felt betrayed by his portrait of American soldiers as dehumanized killers. Abroad, censors in countries like South Africa delayed its release, citing its destabilizing message. But audiences couldn't look away. Lines like, "This is my rifle, this is my gun," became cultural touchstones. Critics wrestled with whether the movie condemned war or simply reveled in its cruelty. Either way, it sparked furious debates in classrooms, barracks, and living rooms. Kubrick himself stayed silent, as always. The man behind the camera let the film speak for itself, and what it said was clear. War doesn't just destroy countries, it destroys people from the inside out. That's why Full Metal Jacket is remembered as one of the most divisive war films ever made. Platoon, 1986. Oliver Stone didn't have to imagine Vietnam, he lived it. When he made Platoon, he poured his own combat experiences onto the screen, creating one of the rawest depictions of the war ever filmed. Starring Charlie Sheen, Willem Dafoe, and Tom Berenger, it showed a unit tearing itself apart, not from enemy fire, but from within. Audiences expecting a heroic war film were stunned. Instead, they saw American soldiers burning villages, killing civilians, and turning on each other. Veterans split sharply. Some praised its authenticity, while others condemned it as a smear job. Critics argued over whether Stone was honoring the truth or fueling anti-military sentiment. The Pentagon flatly refused to cooperate. Stone scraped together financing on his own, filming in the Philippines with military advisors who had been there themselves. When it premiered, theaters filled with both protesters and fans. The controversy didn't stop it from becoming a box office hit and winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Stone himself said it was the movie he had to make, even if it made enemies. And that's why it remains so divisive. For some, Platoon is a searing masterpiece. For others, it's an unforgivable portrait of American soldiers as villains. Born on the 4th of July, 1989. Stone wasn't done. With Born on the 4th of July, he teamed up with Tom Cruise to tell the real-life story of Ron Kovich, a paralyzed Vietnam vet turned outspoken critic of the war. Cruise shocked audiences by trading in his action hero image for a gut-wrenching performance that earned him an Oscar nomination. But controversy came before the credits rolled. Pro-war groups blasted it as propaganda. Veterans protested its release, claiming it glorified protesters while vilifying soldiers. The Pentagon, once again, refused cooperation. Conservative commentators accused Hollywood of undermining patriotism during the Cold War. Yet the film connected. It won 2 Academy Awards and became a rallying point for conversations about how America treated its returning veterans. Cruise's transformation silenced skeptics who doubted he could handle serious drama. Still, many saw the film as too political, too bitter, too willing to drag national wounds back into the spotlight. Stone didn't care. He wanted audiences to feel the betrayal Kovich endured, to see the parades followed by abandonment. And in that sense, Born on the 4th of July was not just a movie, it was a demand that America reckon with its conscience. Casualties of War, 1989. Brian De Palma wasn't afraid of controversy. And with Casualties of War, he walks straight into it. Based on a true story, it followed a squad of U.S. soldiers in Vietnam who kidnapped a young Vietnamese woman during a mission. Michael J. Fox played the conscience of the group, while Sean Penn embodied the darkness. Audiences weren't prepared. Some critics hailed it as brave for confronting war crimes committed by American soldiers. Others called it exploitative and unnecessary, a movie that forced viewers into trauma without offering solutions. The Pentagon refused support, distancing itself entirely. Theaters in conservative towns refused to book it. Veterans groups argued that it smeared the military's reputation. De Palma defended it, saying the truth had to be told, no matter how ugly. At the box office, it underperformed, but its impact lingered. Even today, Casualties of War is rarely rewatched compared to other Vietnam films. But those who have seen it never forget it. That was De Palma's point. War isn't just about glory. It's about the darkest things people are capable of when rules collapse. The Hurt Locker, 2008. By the 2000s, you might think audiences had seen it all, but Kathryn Bigelow's The Hurt Locker proved otherwise. A story about bomb disposal experts in Iraq, it was gritty, nerve-shredding, and deeply controversial. On one side, critics praised its intensity and realism. It went on to win 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, making Bigelow the first woman to win Best Director. On the other side, actual veterans were furious. Some filed lawsuits, claiming it misrepresented their experiences. Iraqi groups condemned its portrayal of civilians, saying it reduced them to stereotypes. Even within America, debates raged. Was it an anti-war film showing soldiers as damaged adrenaline junkies? Or was it pro-war, celebrating their heroism? The fact that no one could agree only fueled the controversy. Bigelow brushed off the attacks, saying the movie wasn't political. It was about the psychology of people living on the edge. But politics followed anyway. To this day, The Hurt Locker divides viewers. Is it a masterpiece or a distortion? One thing's certain, it got everyone talking. From trench warfare in 1930 to Iraq in the 2000s, these films didn't just show battles, they started battles outside the theater. Censors tried to cut them, veterans protested them, and critics fought over them. But that's why they endure. Controversy keeps a movie alive. Which of these do you think pushed the limits the furthest? And could Hollywood even make something this bold today? Drop your thoughts, subscribe, and let's keep the debate alive.